Alright folks, buckle in because today is going to be a bit of a longer video as we talk about the circulatory system. We're also going to be talking very briefly about the other human organ systems. So in our class we're going to be focusing on 3 organ systems: the respiratory system, the circulatory system, and the digestive system. There are many other body systems that exist, and we just don't have the time to cover all of them, so we focus on 3. If you go into higher levels of biology, you do get to experience some of the other systems then. And of course, if you ever want more information, just ask me and I'll find it for you. So the goals are for you to be able to explain the major functions of each system, to be able to explain the main structures and organs of each of these 3 systems, and to be able to explain how these 3 systems interact with one another. So here are some of the systems that exist in the human body. We are missing a few. Each of these systems have a distinct role in the body. What I want you to do is pause the video, try and sort of identify any of the systems that you already know. Do you know sort of what their function is? Okay, so some pretty obvious ones are the respiratory system, and so that allows for gas exchange. The digestive system, and so that allows for the absorption and excretion of sort of energy and waste. Circulatory moves things around the body. Nervous system coordinates with everything else in the body to send signals as well as receive signals. Reproductive, well, as you know, circle of life and all that. The excretory system is how we sort of maintain water and electrolyte balance in the body, as well as excrete some liquid wastes like urine. We have the lymphatic system, which sort of maintains water levels in the blood and also is where white blood cells are formed. And then we have the endocrine system, which is sort of all hormones involved in the body, and those hormones are used to communicate and send signals. We also have the integumentary system, which is basically your skin. Skeletal, I'm sure you know, and muscular. So those are more or less the symptoms, and we can always break some of these systems down into further sections. But more or less, they each have their own unique roles within the body, and they contribute to ensuring the body functions properly. And when one system isn't working properly, it has huge impacts on, the function of the body. So that was my very brief overview on the systems in the body. Now we're going to get into the circulatory system. Okay, what I want you to try to do is write down everything you know about the circulatory system. What is it composed of? What happens there? What does it do? What do you already know? And then once we start getting into the lesson, try adding in anything that's new to your list. Okay, hopefully you paused the video, but if you didn't, here's the circulatory system. Basically, there are a few main components. We have the heart, which acts as a pump. We have blood vessels, which act as sort of roadways or pathways for the blood to travel along. So those are the major components. And together they circulate blood around your body. Without this access to blood, cells will die. This has some interesting impact on sort of regeneration of cells within your body. So for example, some ligaments and tendons, which as you may remember are a type of connective tissue and are made of collagen, among other things, have low vascularization, which basically means there aren't a lot of blood vessels in these tendons and ligaments. Because there aren't a lot of blood vessels, what do you think will happen if an athlete tears a tendon or a ligament in terms of their recovery? Do you think they will recover very easily or poorly? Feel free to pause the video to think that one out. Due to the lack of blood flow to the area, these tendons and ligaments often take a really long time to heal, if they're possible of healing at all. If the damage is too great, then it's possible that they never fully heal. I always kind of joke that I would much rather, break a bone than tear a tendon or a ligament, because the healing process for a broken bone, because they're so well vascularized, is usually a lot more straightforward than, the healing process for a tendon or ligament. Okay, anyhow, I got a bit distracted there. So, when we're talking about blood vessels, there are two pathways. We have the pulmonary circulation, which carries blood to the lungs and back to the heart. And we have the systemic circulation, which carries the blood to the body and back. So here's where we get into the function. Blood carries things. Okay, one of the important things that it carries is oxygen. Oops, sorry about that. It carries oxygen from the lungs to the cells, and it also carries nutrients from the intestines to the cells. So right away, you should be able to recognize where these three different systems interact. We have blood from the circulatory system, we have lungs from the respiratory system, and we have the intestines from the digestive system. So not only does blood carry oxygen, blood also carries carbon dioxide. So it picks up carbon dioxide in the cells and carries it to the lungs to be exhaled. Blood also carries wastes from the cells, and it takes it wherever it needs to go. In the case of things like excess water, sometimes it's the urinary system. If it's a waste product like maybe lactic acid, then that can travel through the blood and it will eventually go to the liver. So depending on what the waste product is kind of determines where it's going to end up. Any blood vessel that is traveling away from the heart is called an artery. You may notice some places that say blood vessels that are carrying oxygen are called arteries, but that's not always the case. The reason being, when blood vessels leave the heart to go to the lungs, it's carrying deoxygenated blood. So what we say is blood vessels moving away from the heart are arteries, always. Conversely, blood vessels traveling to the heart, are always called veins. So the last major type of blood vessel that we need to talk about is capillaries. So capillaries right here are the tiny, tiny blood vessels that connect arteries to veins. These capillaries are the ones that are going to be in contact with the cells of the body. This is where exchange occurs. And so when I say exchange, it means oxygen moving from the blood vessels into the cells, carbon dioxide moving out of the cells into the blood vessels, and same thing for nutrients. Nutrients going into the cells, waste coming out of the cells. And this all happens at the level of the capillaries. And there's a few reasons why. Capillaries are the smallest vessel. They're tiny, and the walls are very, very thin. That means that it's easy for this exchange to occur here. This is in contrast with some of our other blood vessels, for example, our arteries. So as you recall, arteries carry blood away from the heart, and because of that, they're very high pressure. What this means is the heart is pushing blood out very quickly, and the first blood vessels to get hit by this blood are the arteries. So they're very high pressure, which means they need to be strong in order to sort of withstand this pressure. So they're thick, they're very muscular, they're elastic, and they're just generally big and strong and pretty elastic so that they can bounce with the pressure. Veins, on the other hand, have a lot less pressure because by the time the blood gets all the way through from the heart, through the arteries, through the capillaries, and by the time it gets to the veins, well, it has already sort of gone through so many channels that it's gone down in pressure. So these blood vessels don't have to be as strong. They're usually a lot thinner, and they use smooth muscle to help pump the blood back to the heart. So here's just a quick image of that. I particularly like this image. You see here with the artery, the walls around it are a lot thicker compared to the vein, and that's because of that pressure. That's pressure difference coming from the heart. The other thing that's important is veins have valves, and these valves are, we call them one-way valves. Think of it this way. If they're low pressure, blood has to get back up to the heart. But because they're so low pressure, gravity sometimes forces them down. And so in order for them not to go all the way down, we have these one-way valves, which means the blood can go up, but it can't fall all the way down. It can maybe fall just a little bit before it's pushed up again. So we've talked about the blood vessels. Now to talk about the actual blood. The blood is the thing that carries the stuff, basically. There's a few different parts of it. There's the liquid part, which we call plasma, and a solid part, which, is made up of the solids, basically. So the plasma is mostly water. It's got some proteins. It usually is carrying nutrients and hormones and other things. The solid part is mostly blood cells, white blood cells, red blood cells. What a centrifuge does is it splits these apart. So this is an image of a test tube of blood that would have been already centrifuged because they're separated. Usually they don't naturally separate like this. Red blood cells are extremely important. They have something called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein that contains iron. This hemoglobin picks up oxygen. So each hemoglobin actually carries 4 oxygen molecules, and there's tons of hemoglobin in one single red blood cell. These red blood cells then carry the oxygen to the cells. The interesting thing is that the hemoglobin sort of holds on to this oxygen loosely. It's a strong enough bond or connection that they're happy to carry it through the blood vessels. But as soon as they get to an area where oxygen might be low, the oxygen will happily jump off our red blood cell train and go into the cells. Now, carbon dioxide can be transported by red blood cells, but usually it is transported in the water of the blood as part of the bicarbonate buffer system. And this basically just means ensuring that the pH of the blood doesn't get too low by adding those carbon dioxide molecules into it. Basically, what you need to know is carbon dioxide is transported mainly in the water of the blood, but can sometimes be transported by red blood cells. White blood cells help to fight infection, and they do this by destroying sort of foreign material that they don't recognize. We're not going to get into this too much because that is a whole other topic of its own. Similar story with platelets. Basically, platelets are really important in helping to form blood clots. And blood clots are important in stopping us from bleeding or continuously bleeding. And now for our second to last section of the circulatory system, well, it's the last section of the circulatory system, is the heart. The heart is composed of cardiac muscles. In order to get sort of the best push of blood, it's really important that the cardiac muscles contract together. And so for this reason, the cells actually have what are called gap junctions in between, and they're sort of like tunnels that connect one cell to another. And what this does is it allows the signal from one cell to the other to be transmitted very, very rapidly, which means these muscle cells are contracting as one big sort of contraction. The time between individual cells contracting is very, very small. And the thing that actually initiates these contractions are the pacemaker cells. So not to forget our discussion about our tissues, we have epithelial tissue lining the inside and outside of the heart, just helping to protect it from all the friction that comes from that contraction. Okay, one thing you are going to have to know is the names of the major parts of the heart. Oh goodness, the major parts of the heart and the flow of blood. So let's talk about some of them. I know this looks confusing right now, but let me break it down. So basically, we have two chambers at the top here. Those are called atria, or atrium if it's singular. So a heart is always drawn as if you're staring at the heart of someone in front of you. So that means that on the left side will always be the right atrium, because it's the mirror image of the heart that is currently in your body. On the right side will actually be the left atrium. If we zoom out and draw our little human, look, there's our heart in our human, then this human, this is their right side of their body and this is their left side of the body. So that's what I mean by we're staring at the heart as if we're staring at a human. Okay, so we've talked about the atrium. Those are the two top chambers. And then we also have the ventricles. And so I'll draw those in blue. Those are the bottom chambers. And we have, again, our right ventricle on the left-hand side and our left ventricle on the right-hand side. Some other important things you'll need to know are the names of the major blood vessels. So here we have the aorta. And there's our name right there. We also have the pulmonary artery and vein. We'll get into why that's important later. And finally, we have the inferior and, oh, gotta zoom out. Where is it? Well, it got cut out, but superior vena cava. Okay, so those are the parts of the body, or parts of the heart that you're going to need to know. I'm going to then show you how blood flows through the heart. We usually start the process by saying that blood comes into the heart through either the superior vena cava or the inferior vena cava. So it's coming from the body into in through the vena cava. Then it enters the right atrium. From the right atrium, it travels through a little valve and into the right ventricle. At this point, the muscles in the right ventricle will contract, and this pushes the blood out of the right ventricle and into the lung. So it's going to the lung. And of course, at the lung, you know that it's picking up oxygen and getting rid of, so we're getting oxygen and we're getting rid of CO2. So this is the pulmonary circulatory system. Notice that under this little arrow here, it says the pulmonary artery. An artery is any blood vessel that travels away from the heart. Once it hits the lungs, it's going through gas exchange, and then it's going to go in through the pulmonary vein, because a vein is going back towards the heart, and into that left atrium. So our left atrium right here. From our left atrium, it's going to go into our left ventricle. This left ventricle will then contract. See those muscles, big, strong muscles? And that blood will go out the aorta to the different parts of the body. So once more, we have blood coming from the body through the superior and inferior vena cava, then to the right atrium, which will then flow into the right ventricle. The right ventricle will send it to the lungs. It will then go back into the heart and into the left atrium, then to the left ventricle, and out the aorta to the body. So atrium, I kind of think of them as the receiving points of the blood. That's the first place the blood goes. Then they go into the ventricle, and the ventricle is the thing that actually contracts with any force and pushes them out. The blood. It pushes the blood out. One thing you may notice is the difference in musculature around the ventricles. So the right ventricle, which is actually on the left, has much less muscle mass than the left ventricle, which is actually on the right. And the reason is the right ventricle pushes blood into the lungs, which is a much smaller sort of part of your body than the entire body. Well, that just says head and arms, but it is the entire body. So the right ventricle pushes blood into the lungs, and the left ventricle pushes blood into your entire body, and so it needs that musculature. It's important to know that although I'm saying there's this sort of movement of the blood, it's actually all happening at the same time. It's like a circuit in electricity. It's either all going or it's not going. So the ventricles are actually contracting at the same time, and blood is sort of moving around constantly. So it is important to recognize that the circulatory system is not the only sort of circulation of fluids in your body. There's also the lymphatic system, and the lymphatic system circulates lymph. The lymphatic system is sort of considered to be part of the circulatory system because it is circulating lymph around the body and works closely with our sort of circulatory system in the case of blood vessels. The lymphatic system helps to transport fat around the body, but also transports invading bacteria to the lymph nodes where they can be destroyed. It also helps to collect excess fluids from around the tissues and puts them back into the bloodstream. So that's finally it for the circulatory system. If you have any questions, let me know, but good luck!